She fed a grumpy stray wolf for 3 days. Then the Alpha King arrived at her door. Nobody in town knew about the wolf. And honestly, Nora wasn't planning on telling anyone. She had found him on a Tuesday morning, just before sunrise, when she went out to check on the old birch tree that kept dropping branches near her fence. She almost missed him completely. He was lying in the tall grass at the edge of her property, half hidden under a low bush, perfectly still. She thought he was dead at first. Then she saw his side move. Just barely. One slow breath in, one slow breath out. She took a step toward him. He opened his eyes. And those eyes, she stopped right there. They weren't the yellow that most people picture when they think of a wolf. They were gold. Warm, deep gold. Like the inside of an amber stone when you hold it up to the sun. And they were watching her with something that didn't feel like animal fear. It felt like something closer to exhaustion. Like a person who has been awake for 3 days straight and simply has nothing left. She backed off. She didn't run, didn't scream, didn't reach for her phone to call anyone. She just took 4 slow steps backward, turned around, and walked to her kitchen. She came back 20 minutes later with leftover venison from the night before, a shallow bowl of water, and the careful, deliberate calm of someone who has spent the last 11 years rehabilitating animals for a living. She set both things down 15 feet away from him, didn't push it closer, didn't wait and watch. She turned around and walked back to the house. She did not look back, but she listened, and a few minutes later, she heard the quiet sounds of something eating. The next morning, she cleaned his wound. That sounds simple. It wasn't. He had a long, deep gash along his left side that looked nothing like a bite, nothing like a bullet wound, nothing like anything Nora had treated in over a decade of wildlife work. The edge of it was strange, almost burned, almost deliberate, like someone had drawn a shape into him with something hot. She had seen a lot of injuries on a lot of animals. This one made her chest feel tight in a way she didn't fully understand. She cleaned it carefully, using a cloth wrapped around a long stick so she didn't have to get too close. He growled twice, low, warning sounds that rumbled through the still morning air. But he didn't move, and after the second growl, something in him just settled. He lowered his big head down onto his paws. He kept his eyes on her the whole time, but the warning had gone out of them. He was letting her help him. Not gratefully, not easily, but he was letting her. Nora had been doing this long enough to know that the moment an animal stops fighting you is not always the moment they trust you. Sometimes it's just the moment they've run out of fight. She wasn't sure which one this was. She finished what she was doing, stood up, and carried her things back to the house without a word. That evening, she talked to him. She sat on her porch steps with her coffee, and she told him about the elk she'd found the previous spring, shot by a poacher and left in the woods to suffer, too injured to run and too proud to stop trying. She'd spent 4 weeks getting that elk back on its feet. She told the wolf about the morning she finally opened the gate and watched the elk walk back into the tree line and not look back, and how that moment had felt like the best thing that had ever happened to her, even though it meant she was alone again. The wolf lay in the grass and listened to every word. She wasn't sure why she told him all of that. She just knew it felt less strange than sitting in silence. On the third morning, she found a dead rabbit on her porch step. She stood there for a moment, looking at it, then looked out at the tree line, where she could just barely see him watching her from the shadows. She picked up the rabbit, nodded once in his direction, the way you nod at a neighbor when you can't think of anything else to say, and went back inside. She had no idea what to do with a dead rabbit. She ended up burying it in the garden. It felt like the right thing. That was day 3. And on the night of day 3, everything changed. Nora was in the barn at midnight, finishing up some paperwork, when the light came. Not a lamp, not a torch, not anything she had a name for. It pulsed once from somewhere in the trees, cold, blue-silver, sharp enough to throw shadows across the barn walls even through the closed window. She was out the door before she had time to think about it. She ran through the frost-covered grass toward the tree line, her boots soaking through within 10 steps, her breath coming out in pale clouds. When she got there, the wolf was gone. Instead, there was a man. He was lying on his back in the grass, unconscious, with the cold November air, doing nothing good for the fact that he had no shirt, no jacket, no anything, except a pair of dark trousers, that looked like they belonged to someone who had not been expecting to wake up in a field. He was large, not in a frightening way, but in the way that makes you think whoever made him was working with more material than usual. And there, running along his left side, was a scar, long, faintly burned at the edges, in exactly the same place the wolf's wound had been. Nora stood there for 4 full seconds. Then she went back to the barn, got the heavy blanket off the shelf, came back, and covered him up. He woke on her couch. She had given him a thick sweater that had belonged to her late uncle, and a pair of sweatpants that were 2 inches too short for his legs. He sat up slowly, looked around the room with the careful attention of someone cataloging exits, and then looked at her. She was in the armchair across from him, both hands wrapped around her coffee mug, watching him with the same calm, patient look she gave to animals that were deciding whether or not to bolt. "You should be frightened of me," he said. His voice was low and measured, like someone who had spent centuries choosing words carefully and hadn't bothered to stop. "You were shaking in my yard," she said. "Give me a few minutes before I rearrange everything I believe." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "I am the High Alpha King of the Valkrath Coalition. I lead 11 wolf packs across 2 continents. "That's quite a lot," Nora said. "Do you take sugar in your coffee?" He blinked. "No." She got up and poured him a cup. His name was Caius. He didn't offer it easily. She had to ask twice. And when he finally said it, it sounded like something he hadn't needed to say for a while, like a word in a language you know but rarely speak. Over the next hour, the story came out in pieces. There were wolf packs, apparently, organized in a way that had been running quietly alongside human civilization for longer than anyone alive could remember. Caius led them all. He had been in a meeting, a political negotiation with a rival group, when someone had used an old curse to strip him of his form and leave him in the human world to fade. The curse was designed to work slowly, to isolate, to make sure he couldn't find his way back. "Then why didn't it work?" Nora asked. He was quiet for a moment. "Because I wasn't alone." He didn't say it softly. He said it the way you state a fact, plainly, without decoration. But Nora heard the weight underneath it anyway. She picked up her coffee cup. She didn't say anything. Sometimes silence is the kindest response. Later that morning, a man showed up at her door, in a suit that cost more than her truck. He introduced himself as Riven, Caius's second-in-command, and bowed to her with the kind of formal respect that made her feel both deeply uncomfortable and, somewhere underneath that, quietly moved. He had been looking for Caius for 6 days. He had tracked him to her tree line. He had watched, from a distance, for long enough to understand what had happened. The curse required him to be completely alone, Riven explained carefully. 3 consecutive days with no pack, no contact, no one. That's how it would have killed him. But you, he gestured at Nora in a way that seemed to mean, you were just here, doing what you do, and that was enough. Nora looked at Caius. So I accidentally saved you by feeding you venison. Yes, Caius said. He said it like it pained him slightly. She almost smiled. Before he left, Caius placed a white envelope on her kitchen table. He told her she had done something that created a formal debt under his people's laws, and that the envelope contained enough to clear any debt he could think of. Nora looked at the envelope. She looked at him. I don't want your money. He did not have a response to that. He stood in her kitchen, looking like a man who had navigated wars and politics and ancient power struggles, completely without a script for this particular moment. He picked up the envelope, tucked it into his jacket, and walked to the door. Riven opened the car. They drove about 20 feet down her gravel driveway. Caius said, "Stop the car." Riven stopped. Caius sat there. Then he got out. He walked back to where Nora was still standing on her porch, watching him with the expression of someone who had not fully expected this. You haven't told me what you want, he said. I'm still thinking, she said. I'll come back in 3 days, he said. She blinked. For what? To hear what you've decided. He got back in the car. Riven drove. Neither of them spoke for a very long time. He came back on the 3rd day. Alone this time, no car, no Riven, no suit. He came through the tree line on foot in the late afternoon, and for the first time, he knocked on her door. She opened it. You knocked, she said. You gave me a blanket, he said, as if this was a perfectly complete explanation. She stood aside to let him in. They sat in her kitchen for most of the afternoon. She asked him what it had been like. The 3 days as a wolf, alone, unable to speak or reach anyone. He thought about it for a long moment before answering. He told her it was like losing a sense he hadn't known he had. His whole life, he had been connected to his pack, not loudly, not constantly, but the way you're connected to the sound of a house you've lived in for years. You don't notice it until it goes silent. When the curse stripped it from him, the quiet was the worst part. Nora listened to this and thought about her mother, about the specific quality of the silence that fills a house after someone who lived in it is gone. She didn't say that out loud, but she understood it completely. "What do you want?" he asked eventually. "Your debt. Name it." She thought for a moment. Then, "I want to know you made it. When everything is settled, the politics, the council, all of it, I just want one message, that you're okay. That's all." He stared at her. "That's it? That's it. In 300 years, he said quietly, that is the smallest thing anyone has ever asked of me." "I know," she said. "You're welcome." He went back to his world. There were councils to face, challenges to survive, and one very pointed political situation involving the people who had arranged the curse in the first place. Nora read none of this in any newspaper, heard none of it from anyone. She just went back to her work. She checked on a recovering fox. She repaired the fence. She ate her dinners alone, and did not, she told herself firmly, think about the empty chair across from her at the table. She thought about it twice. Both times she told herself she wasn't. 3 weeks later, a message arrived. 7 words. "I made it. I am well. See." She read it twice, set her phone down, picked it up again, read it a third time, then she went back to work. Because what else do you do? He came a third time. She had not asked him to. The debt was paid, there was no reason for it. But there he was, on a cold Saturday morning, coming up her gravel drive with his hands in his jacket pockets, and no explanation she could see. She was already on the porch with 2 cups of coffee when he got there. He stopped when he saw the 2 cups. Something shifted in his expression, not dramatically, not in a way most people would catch. But Nora had spent 11 years reading animals, and she caught it. "The debt is paid," she said. "I know," he said. "So why are you here?" He was quiet for a moment, then, "Because you didn't wait for me." "And I noticed. What do you mean?" "People wait for me," he said. "My entire life, at tables, at doors, in meeting rooms. They stop what they're doing. They arrange themselves. You just went back to your work and left a light on, and that was..." He stopped, started again. "I don't have a protocol for this. I don't know how to do whatever this is." "Neither do I," she said. "Then we'll figure it out," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she held out the second cup of coffee. He took it. He sat down on the porch step next to her. They didn't say anything for a while. The morning was cold and quiet and perfectly still, and somewhere out in the tree line, a woodpecker was working at something with great determination, and the coffee was hot, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, the silence in Nora's morning didn't feel empty. It felt like the beginning of something. 3 months later, Nora's barn had a new patient, a wolf pup with a fractured leg, no pack markings, no tag, nothing that explained where he'd come from. She found him at the gate on a Thursday morning, small and furious, and trying very hard to act like his leg didn't hurt. She brought him inside, splinted the leg, set him up with water and food. Then she sent Caius a picture. He arrived that evening and crouched next to the crate for a long time, just looking. Then he said, "He has markings. You just can't see them the way you see other things." "What pack?" she asked. Caius looked at her. There was something in his expression she had started to recognize over the past months. The slightly unsettled look he got when something moved him, and he wasn't sure what to do about it. He looked back at the pup. "Mine." Nora nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "Then he stays until he's healed. And then you can take him home." Caius sat down on the barn floor next to her, his back against the wall, the pup in the crate between them, watching them both with sharp, cautious eyes. "You know," Nora said after a while, "when I found you in that grass, I had absolutely no plan." "I know," he said. "I was just going to feed you until you felt better, and then let you go." "I know." She glanced at him sideways. "You didn't go." He looked at her. His expression was quiet, unhurried, the way it got when he had already worked out what he wanted to say, and simply wasn't in a rush to say it. "No," he said. He didn't say anything else. He didn't have to. The pup settled down in his crate with a small, exhausted sound. Outside, the November wind moved through the birch trees at the edge of the property, and the barn was warm, and neither of them moved for a long time.